Hey, we're live. This is a special show today. Um, we appreciate you guys being here. I know we were going to do a show yesterday, but as a lot of you guys know, Zeb is a daddy again. He just had another baby. Little baby Zane has entered the building. And I basically was feeling really sick yesterday, so ended up not doing a show. You can tell my voice is a little hoarse still, but I've got a special guest today for you guys. This guy's been on the show before. He's someone I know through the radio on my radio show and another radio show that I work for. This is Dr. Joe Aniello. He's a professor or former professor at Francis Marion University.
That's true. With three children, so Zeb is still one behind.
All right. Well, he's catching up. Won't be long now.
That's right. He's on the move.
But
I'm
so
retired.
It's been, yeah,
from everything.
it's okay. So Ninja Space says Zane. I spelled the same as my 5-year-old. Close. They spell it like Zayne. I was kind of joking, like people poke fun. They say like, what's with black people, and they come up with all these like over the top names for their kids. Zebulon, Xander, Zane. There's Zeb's like the white version of them.
Well, and you know what's funny though? It's always been that way. When my dad was born, he had a brother named Meraldo, Alfredo, Antonio, Federico, and you can imagine all the WASPs thought that was really just, Italian Dago names that were weird as can be. So I guess it's always been that way, right? What we think is normal is only what we're used to. So
right, yeah.
I often think of that when I think of Shaniqua. Is that any different than Meraldo? Probably not at the time.
Probably not. Probably not. But yeah, so today, I guess we'll jump right into it. You've written a book that, for the audience that doesn't know this, you wrote a book about the difference between management and leadership. And we've had you on the show several times before to talk about that, but it's been a while and we've kind of accrued a few regular listeners since then. So I thought, this would be a good time to introduce you. You're going to be moving to New Hampshire in about a month. So it'd be a good time to get you back on the show before the doctor has left the building.
Well, and hopefully we'll do some long distance work together.
Yeah, but basically, Zeb actually did get Zoom calls working, so we could definitely get you on a Zoom call.
The
quality wouldn't be the same, but it is what it is.
We'll want to keep the connection,
absolutely,
however possible.
So I wanted to talk a little bit today, and you guys feel free to chime in the comments, but the split between Elon and Donald Trump. Now, I know you and I we've talked about like you've gone into many in-depth conversations with us about the difference between management and leadership, the types of people that make managers and the types of people that make leaders, because in today's society, we have so many people that manage things. We have so many managers, and people often misconstrue that with leadership. And so I thought before we kind of delve into the specifics of this situation, why don't you give us a little bit of an idea, the difference between the two?
Sure. Yeah, well, and of course, the premise of my book was that demographics are kind of an old way of looking at things. By categorizing people by their age, by their income, by their education, by their race, gender, religion, is kind of like superficial demographic, psychographic type of information. My kind of theory is that there are people who are managers and there are people who are leaders. And that is a big and important difference. Most people are managers. Leaders are very rare. And so it's much more difficult to be a leader. A leader is someone that creates a vision for something that does not exist. Managers plan, organize, decide, motivate, but leaders actually transform the way we do things. And so, Martin Luther King might have been considered a visionary about civil rights. Abraham Lincoln, a leader about how the United States of America should be unified. And so those are more rare and less frequent than managing our daily affairs, right? And one of my ideas was that Donald Trump, for all of his differences, the way he did not seem like your typical politician, Donald Trump seemed to have emerged as some sort of leader potential in that he had a vision for something very different, very transformative. Make America great again, or putting America first. Those were very disruptive and very unusual compared to your typical politician. Your typical politician is managing their campaign. They're using power for their own benefit. They are organizing around getting elected. Those things don't compare with something like truth. There's lies, damn lies, and research. We're used to kind of just using information as the best source of knowledge we have, but really, information is not accurate, right? Is Pluto a planet or a dwarf planet? Was the world round or flat? Did the Earth revolve around the sun or the sun around the Earth? I mean, our best facts, our best information have been revised, and they're still being revised. When was the first skeleton of humanoids appearing on the planet? They're changing that year.
Are you a
almost every
filthy
year.
evolutionist? We don't allow evolutionists on this show.
Well, the scientists. Well, and that makes a good point, though. The scientists are managing. They are using carbon dating to describe a skeleton that's 50,000 years old. I think someone who subscribes to creationism, the intelligent design, knows that the creator of the universe had this all planned right from the beginning. He or she knew that the scientists were going to discover this, and they were going to gradually get more facts and data and information. But see, the truth really doesn't change. And that's what leaders deal in. They deal in truth, not necessarily information or data. And so, when you look at Donald Trump, should there be a specific policy to distinguish legal versus illegal immigrants? Is there some benefit to having $40 trillion in debt that we can never pay back? I mean, don't shoot the messenger in this case, but Donald Trump is demonstrating leadership by pointing out these things. So many of the other politicians are just, closing their eyes or pulling the covers over their head and pretending that we don't have to deal with this, pretending this isn't a problem. And when you try to export, when you try to deport, rather, a criminal who's killed a mother of two, there are managers who feel that due process is most important. Whereas a leader is more inclined to say, is that the kind of person we want in our country? Is that the kind of person who should get the benefits of citizenship? And that's a truth, but it's a hard pill to swallow because most of us are just trying to get through day by day, week by week. And so a leader who disrupts us with the uncomfortable truth is a bit shocking. And so, that's why a lot of people fight a leader. They fought Christ, right? They fought other leaders that have manifested transformative ideas because they're guarding their own self-interest. But, leaders are thinking about others. They're thinking about other people, or they're thinking about the country at whole, or their company at whole, or their family at whole. And so that's why, most people are only capable of management, and it's better to be a good manager of your family, of your team, of your company, than it is to be a poor leader. But we need leadership to kind of lead us out of this mess we're in. And it takes someone who has a vision for something that doesn't currently exist. I mean, just imagine how hard it is to see something in your mind's eye. Yeah, we can see a cell phone now that we pick it up and we play with it. But, who was the guy who said, hey, we don't need to be connected to a direct line to talk on the telephone? That was a guy who envisioned something that didn't exist. And that's as rare as, dunking a basketball or singing 4 octaves or hitting a golf ball 300 yards. We're talking about less than 1% of the people who could do that stuff.
Right.
And in politics, we're talking about less than 1% of the people who are leaders, not just political operatives or managers.
Yeah, I thought the little drive-by comment I made about evolution. So for your sake, audience, Dr. Joe is a Catholic. He believes in God. He's a Christian. So don't worry. We didn't bring some filthy atheist onto the show.
No. The only difference is we have a Pope and the Virgin Mary that we elevate to certain importance that the regular Protestant Christians don't value that much.
Yeah, he basically. I thought the little drive-by comment about evolution, because like when I'm here, somehow it seems like the topic of evolution always comes up, and the audience and Zeb, they always jump on me because I'm like, I don't know.
Well, no, God loves scientists, even though they're providing things that aren't necessarily the ultimate truth.
And I don't know if I buy that they're all lying. You know what I mean? But it's at the same time. Someone the other day, they asked me, do you believe in dinosaurs? And I was like, I don't know. And they were like, wait, you believe in evolution, but you don't believe in dinosaurs? And I'm like, I didn't say either of those things. My point is that I don't believe the theory of evolution is incompatible. I've seen people like rationalize between the two, but like basically that I think if you ascribe to that view, and I do think that most people actually do misunderstand Scripture. I think that the point of Genesis is about the point, not about the literal interpretation. But anyway, that's kind of besides the point. My point is that I don't know. And I don't care. If God said that, yeah, evolution's true, I'd be like, okay. I mean, or even if like a scientist proved it beyond the shadow of any doubt, I'd be like, oh, okay. I mean, I'm still a Christian. And same thing with dinosaurs. It's like I don't really care if they're real or not.
There's still someone at the beginning of evolution, right? An intelligent designer, omnipotent and omnipresent.
Yellow Moth says, hey, where is our normal low IQ host? He's churning out more low IQ babies. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding, Zeb. I'm teasing you. But yeah, so you're talking you talk about the difference between leadership and management, and that's why I wanted to have you on today, Dr. Joe, because the audience wouldn't know this, but like I've got my own radio show I do on Saturday mornings, and that's how you and I became acquainted. You started to call into my show regularly, and this past Saturday, you and I had a conversation on the air about we talked about many things, but the main thing I wanted to address in light or in lieu, I don't know the proper expression, but like in light of this sort of divide between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, I wanted to get your perspective on this because if you recall, I've been very skeptical of Donald Trump's administration, not Donald Trump the man. I think Donald Trump is actually a good man, and I think he's been a net positive for the America First movement. But I do think there's some chinks in the armor. You know what I mean? I think he's actually some of the things I like about him, which is that he kind of flies by the seat of his pants. He's kind of does things on a whim. He just speaks his mind. That's one of the things I love about him. But conversely, I feel like he doesn't plan things out. And like with the president, like we had someone on the station today talking about how the president, they're like the final say, but they have what's the word I'm looking for? Like subsidiaries. They have employees, subordinates. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Subordinates who he relies on to bring him the proper information and convey it to him in a way that he can make a decision. I don't trust a lot of the people that are in his administration, and you and I may disagree on that. That's kind of besides the point. I guess my point is if you recall our conversation on Saturday, I basically talked about how I think that there is this naive optimism generally in people of your age range because and I totally get this. I'll probably feel the same way when I'm your age as well. You know, when we had, you know, like I criticize the boomer generation for being like, would y'all shut up about Ronald Reagan? I'm probably going to be 60, 70 years old. Like, we need a new Donald Trump, and they're going to be like, shut up about Donald Trump. We've got Joey Blowy over here now, you know.
But see that's why I believe in dinosaurs, because I'm old enough to remember them as pets.
That's good. But yeah, so my question, I guess, would be is, you know, we've talked about leader and like how we've elected Donald Trump to be our leader, and it's incumbent on people, like it's incumbent on subordinates, which we, you know, being American citizens and him being the American president, in a way, we are his subordinates. And I do agree that when you elect a leader, you have to let them lead you. You know, if you're saying, I want this guy to be my king, and then when he does something you don't like or don't agree with, or here's a better analogy. If you're a soldier and you're like, okay, our general just died and we've got 5 whatever's below a general, a lieutenant, who knows, not me, but like, okay, let's pick one of these 5 guys. All right, well, we picked this dude. And then he did something I didn't like. I kind of regretting that. That's not how leadership works. That's not how being a subordinate works. You're supposed to follow your leader, even when you don't understand. That's how these things work. So I agree with you in principle about like kind of having faith in Donald Trump. However, I do think when you look at his track record and what's going on now, it's fair to be critical about some of the things going on. So I wanted to, with that in mind, I wanted to get your assessment of the situation. And basically, it's been more than 100 days now, and this apparent split between Elon and Donald Trump. What do you think about it?
Well, you know, coming from my perspective and my research on leadership versus management, it really kind of makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that both Donald Trump and Elon Musk fit the definition of leaders.
Right.
And so much like, you know, like poles of magnets repel, eventually it was going to come to the point where they were going to disagree.
Yeah.
What happened was, as the president, Donald Trump was in the leadership position, but he asked Elon Musk to be his manager for a couple months. Forget the fact that you have SpaceX to Mars. Forget the fact that you have Tesla. You need to kind of manage Doge.
Right.
And a true leader could only play that role for a little while. At some point, the things that make him a great leader are going to run in conflict with anybody.
Sure.
And so, you know, just like you can only serve one master, you know, at some point, you know, I think Elon Musk was a good citizen. He volunteered to do something he could do, but now he's done. Now he's ready. And see, one of the big things that also happen with subordinates tend to work for managers, right? Just because you're a manager doesn't mean you can be a president or CEO or vice president. Mm-hmm. Subordinates do what they're told, like in the military, because that's their job. Mm-hmm. People who are inspired by leaders are followers.
Right.
So in other words, they're not doing things to get paid or out of fear of being fired. They are doing things because they believe. And so the problem is Donald Trump needs a lot of managers under him. Even the cabinet, you know, Marco Rubio, you know, Secretary of State, all of these folks are being asked to manage their department. Mm-hmm. So they have to do a good job organizing, deciding, planning, etc., meeting objectives. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to have a perfect vision.
Right.
So Donald Trump has the vision. He asks his managers to carry out the mission.
Right.
But in carrying out the mission, you know, facts can be distorted. Truths can be manipulated, right? Facts can be false. Mm-hmm. Information can be cooked. Things can be interpreted. Is the glass half full or half empty? Well, if I make $1 million with a half full glass, I'm going to see the glass as half full.
Right.
If I see it make $1 million as the glass is half empty, I'm going to see that's half empty. So the difference between leaders and managers also can be expressed in terms of the difference between followers and subordinates. Who does it because they actually believe and want to do it? Who does it because it's their job? And I'm not putting down anyone who does their job and does it well, because we need a lot of subordinates. But when you put Donald Trump and Elon Musk together, eventually they're going to repel and butt heads. And obviously, when it comes to the budget, Donald Trump has to be more pragmatic than Elon Musk.
Yeah. I can't say I'm totally surprised at this split between them. And, I'm a little bit more conspiracy minded, so I'm wondering if this is a little bit astroturfed, but I won't say it is, because honestly, I don't know what the goal of that would be. But that's kind of what I wanted to have you on and I kind of figured that would be your answer, where it's like, there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians in this relationship between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And I remember thinking, there was a press conference not long after Donald Trump was re-inaugurated, and Elon was there, and he was basically answering all the questions, and Donald Trump was deferring to Elon on like everything, and Elon was basically standing behind Donald Trump, but the spotlight was on him. And I remember thinking, like, do they have something on Trump? Because, like, this is so unlike him to kind of let the spotlight shift to somebody else. Now, granted, Donald Trump is in his, what is he, in his late 70s, early 80s now?
Yeah.
So, it's obvious that he's aging. He's lost a step. It's obvious.
But you know what? I think that was a very smart calculation on behalf of Donald Trump.
Really?
I think Donald Trump, he knows that Elon Musk is a leader. If he wanted Elon Musk to lead the Doge effort, I think he had to appeal to his ego. And I think he deliberately gave him the spotlight for a while, so that would get him committed to doing that job, and for him to stick around and create that team that was necessary in order to complete the savings and identify the fraud, waste, and abuse that was existing. So I think Donald Trump was playing chess by moving his pawn, Elon Musk, to the spotlight, because that really served the overall objective.
So you think that this was actually intentional, that he used Elon Musk, appealed to Musk's ego, which I agree. Musk has an ego. Yeah, he's an autistic or Asperger's person.
Yeah.
But he has an ego.
Right, because why else would Elon Musk do this? I mean, we couched it as patriotism, right? But based on what happened with all the Tesla dealerships and all the damage and destruction, I mean, it cost Elon Musk a couple $2 billion to take this job with Donald Trump, right? With all the money he lost with Tesla stock and all, you either have to say, he was very foolish, or he was willing to lose 10% of his wealth for the good of the country.
So this is basically, now Elon Musk has plausible deniability. It's like, I've done everything I can now. Doge is still there. Like, all the employees he has, like, are still operating, but this is almost a way for him to save face to get this Tesla stock back up.
To get back to his main job. I mean,
Right.
in a sense, and this is an overly dramatic explanation, but it's kind of like after the crucifixion of Jesus, it was up to the disciples to go out and spread the word. So Jesus did his part with the miraculous, crucifixion and resurrection, and that was enough to motivate and inspire this legion of followers that's 2,000 years old and 2 billion strong. So, again, that was the most dramatic example of leadership in the world's history. But in some small way, this is exactly what Trump is trying to do. Now, he hasn't gotten the 100% buy-in. There's a lot of Republicans who are not on board. There are a lot of people who are fighting him, namely every single Democrat. But even his own party aren't blindly followers, right? They're still questioning. They still want to put their 2 cents in. And I guess the way I would summarize Donald Trump and Elon Musk is politics makes strange bedfellows.
Yeah, yeah. And that's something that Ken Ard talked about on Wake Up Carolina is basically, what did he say? That Elon Musk, he's clearly on the spectrum, and he is the CEO, manager, or leader of a business. And businesses don't run like governments do, especially like our government does. Like you as the CEO of Tesla, you say jump and everyone in the company says how high, which is not how politics works, unfortunately. However, I'll be honest. I think that this split between the two is organic. I don't at this point in time believe that this is... I do think that doing it to save face for Elon is a factor, but it's not the main factor. I do think that they probably butt heads. And I know we said we weren't going to talk about this today because you're not totally aware of what it is, but it's kind of coming up organically. So, we'll just let it happen. But I and others have speculated, mainly the others, that that this was actually a ploy to get Palantir. You basically used Trump as a Trojan horse to further ingratiate Palantir into the function of our government. And so, excuse me, the throat was starting to dry up. Basically, Palantir is a surveillance company, and they've done many things. One of their most interesting, we'll call it interesting things, is during COVID, they were examining wastewater and septic tanks and stuff like that to detect whether or not people in certain areas were actually being vaccinated, whether they were just fudging the results. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's basically a surveillance, a hardcore surveillance company. And now I think Donald Trump, they basically just signed something where Palantir is going to have access to Social Security, to educate, basically almost all the avenues of privacy that we have. Palantir, which is a private company, will now have access to. And I this might shock you guys, the audience, but Joe here, one of the things that kind of got him interested in my show is he's actually awake on the JQ. There's actually a chapter in his book. It's Biblical Babble, right?
Yep.
Biblical Babble, where he talks a little bit about what the Bible describes as a people who are stiff-necked. and so he actually understands. And basically, Peter Thiel he himself is not Jewish, but he is very, very ingratiated with Israel. Palantir was basically funded by Israel. They created this AI software within the past 2 years called Lavender, which is basically a way of identifying Palestinians. And so my point is it's there's nothing on its face that is just horrific for the American people right now, but kind of like the Patriot Act after 9/11. Mm-hmm. And now you're starting to see all this rise in anti-Semitic, violent behavior. Again, people throwing Molotov cocktails at a Jewish protest. Those 2 diplomats were shot outside of a Jewish congregation or something like that.
Yeah.
Museum, yeah. And so you're starting to see all this, and I think I don't think those things were staged. I think those things genuinely happened, but it's almost like that will be the excuse. God forbid another 9/11 type event does happen organically or otherwise, that would basically say, well, now we have to take away even more of your privacy. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of the people that Elon Musk, who is a part of the PayPal mafia, as it's called, he worked with Peter Thiel to create PayPal. They're buddies, so to speak. A lot of the people that he hired to work on Doge formerly worked for Palantir. And now Elon Musk might be out for one reason or another, but basically I wouldn't be surprised if this whole operation was a subtle way of getting Palantir, and basically like I'm kind of connecting the dots for you, but work with me here.
Yeah, sure.
You've got Israel controls Israel helps Peter Thiel. They fund PayPal. Peter Thiel creates Palantir, which has basically been confirmed one way through another that it is a front for Mossad. Now you have Elon Musk connected with Peter Thiel, also connected with J.D. Vance, who is coming into the Department of Government Efficiency. We're going to cut $2 trillion from the deficit or whatever. We're going to be profitable again. They cut like a couple billion, nowhere close to what they said. And now it's almost like over, but what was left over? We didn't get what was promised. What did we get?
But we have our tentacles in the privacy of all these folks.
Exactly. Sure. And now, and think about this, October 7th, Israel clearly wants a war with Iran. I feel like this is what's going on is they are pushing their advantage to further ingratiate their tentacles into our society. Well, that's the fear with this whole situation.
Yeah, well, and a couple things, I guess, to understand that politics is really not a leadership industry. Mm-hmm. Politics is a management industry. Power is the currency.
Right.
And people want to get their way.
Yeah.
And so Peter Thiel, doesn't strike me as having any of the leadership properties of Elon Musk. But Elon Musk is both a leader and a really good manager.
Right.
So all of these systems they're putting in place, suits their purposes of maintaining power and increasing their power. Uh-huh. Now, if you go back to the Bible, okay, and the idea that such a small group of people would be God's only chosen people, I think the way the Jewish people describe themselves in the Old Testament is a very elite group.
Right.
Right? We are the best. We are the only. We are chosen. And so that is kind of an attitude of elitism and privilege that has prevailed through their people. Mm-hmm. And the reaction to that by non-chosen people, by Gentiles, is eventually anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. We don't like what you're doing. And you may have some motivation, but we have the numbers. You're 2% of the population. We're 98% of the population, and we don't like your rules.
Right.
Now, a guy like Peter Thiel would like the rules because Mossad and the power of the Jewish financial community is making it worth his while. Mm-hmm. And leveraging money is a really smart thing to do when you have small numbers.
Right.
But I think since the anti-Semitistic protests, that's kind of the only way they can get back because they don't control the media. They don't control a lot of the political institutions. So all they could do is protest. It's kind of like, Israel has nuclear weapons and an Iron Dome, and Palestinians have rocks and bottles. When you have rocks and bottles, you throw rocks and bottles.
Yeah.
They're using what they have to basically protest. And so I think that's what's happening here is that you have the power group trying to put their foundation in for long-term future benefits and gains. And then you have the people who recognize this as being unfair, are rebelling against the elites trying to get all the good stuff and leaving nothing for the 98%.
Well, yeah, because clearly, like when you start to look into the history of our greatest ally, you basically start to see the avid obsession that even like your average Jewish person has with it. Like Larry David, creator of Seinfeld, he's Jewish, but he's very like nominally. He's not Orthodox. He makes fun of Orthodox Jews. He pokes fun at them, but he also makes fun of Jesus, which is a very traditionally Jewish thing. I mean, and Jews control Hollywood. This is known, and you get all these anti-Christ movies. I mean, anti-Catholic, anti-Christian, making fun of them, every movie you got a Christian in it who's some like weird raving lunatic. None of the Christians are normal or anything like that. And the point being is like you start to see that they like someone like Larry David, when Israel gets attacked, comes out in support of it, because even to like your most basic Jewish person, Israel is a representation of themselves, and they see it as an attack on themselves. And they're very paranoid people. I mean, this is well documented, and they're what's the word I'm looking for? Where like they hold a grudge. Is petty the right word? Would petty be a good word for that?
Vengeful.
Vengeful. Oh, absolutely. I saw a tweet the other day. Some young man was holding a little like Torah pamphlet or something. He was at the Acropolis, and is that in Greece or Rome?
Athens.
Athens, yes. And he was at the Acropolis, and he took like a picture of himself with the Torah, and he was like, "Rome is gone, but we're still here." And it's like, what was that, like 2,000 plus years ago? Like, get over it, dude. You know what I mean? But they don't. They see it that way. And that's my point is we don't have that same kind of like paranoid vigor. But just because we don't doesn't mean that they don't. You know what I mean? And you're seeing that someone like Bill Ackman, who is a liberal Jewish billionaire, after October 7th, he comes out in support of Donald Trump. And I think that's because basically what I've been afraid of is, and believe me, I think Donald Trump is a good man, and I think he has good intentions, but he needed help this time around. It was not a self-funded campaign, and I'm afraid that he was a Trumpian or Trojan horse to kind of help consolidate their power, especially in this time of uncertainty. Like 10, 20 years ago, especially after 9/11, there was no fear from the fifth column in our nation that we were on the same page. But now you're starting to see all of these, you're starting to see people on the right and especially on the left wing that are coming out against the nation of Israel, which as an American, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not about hating the Jewish people. It's not about wanting to kill or hurt anyone. It's about wanting to have sovereignty over our own nation. It's like if you vote for a politician, like Lindsey Graham, for example, you vote for him over and over and over again, and you get, and they promise things you do want, and they never deliver on things, and they only deliver on things you don't want. And then you say, well, I'm sick of that. I'm going to vote for somebody else. And then they promise the things you do want, and then they only deliver what you don't want. It's like, well, what's the problem here? And you realize the voters don't actually have the power. As soon as you vote, you have relinquished your power.
Because we're a representative democracy.
Yes, because think about it like this way. Who has more power, the donors or the voters? And you would say, well, the vote is what gets counted, not the amount of dollars. It's like, yeah, but the amount of dollars really contributes to the amount of voters. And here's the thing. The people that donate, they have those politicians' cell phone numbers. They have their email addresses. They can get them on the phone that day if they wanted to. Can you do that?
No. And they make it very clear what they want in return for their donations.
Right.
Getting back to your point about modern day Israel, it's really no different than at the time of Christ. I mean, Jesus was Jewish, and he recommended some changes to the religion.
Right.
Let's get off the legalism and let's look for a little bit more agape love from each other.
Right.
They rejected that. They were waiting for the Messiah.
I've never heard it pronounced agape. I've only heard agape. That's a new one for me. Either way, I mean,
I'm probably wrong. I'm not as biblically versed as you are, but
The pronunciation isn't.
the
my
point is,
forte either.
it's the love of fellow man.
Right.
It's not filial love, parental love, brotherly love, it's romantic love, etc. It's the love of fellow man, and
Right.
they rejected that concept because, to be honest with you, it wasn't as advantageous to the people in power. It was much better to be an elite group of chosen people
Right.
than to be just like everybody else. And so, in some ways, I'm not even so sure that anti-Semitism doesn't work in their favor, because they can always play the anti-Semite card the way African Americans play the race card, and that seems to accomplish the long-term end benefit.
Yes.
And so I'm a little bit concerned about the way things are going now. But when you think about it, they rejected Jesus because he wasn't giving the message they wanted to hear. And now the Democrats, who had been traditionally in support of Israel and been the party of the Jewish Americans, as soon as the Democrats started turning against Israel and started turning toward the Gazans and the Palestinians, a lot of the Jewish people like Ackman kind of have moved over to Republicans, have moved over to Donald Trump.
Right.
So in some respect, it's, whoever serves my interests best is what I'm going to support.
Right. And what is that interest?
Well, and the interest is always Israel.
Right.
And so whether we have to get into a war with Iran or whether we had to get into a war with Germany, the point is we are always encouraged to do what's best for a very small percentage of the population. And again, as America firsters, I'm not sure that we really have any business in the Middle East. And when you think about it, objectively, Persia has been a great civilization. I mean, the Persian people have been pretty darn impressive.
Sure.
And I'm not so sure why we want to, eliminate them any more than people who want to eliminate Israel should get to do that.
Yeah, and of course it's like the media and the Israelis, they try to portray it as like this good versus evil. Like we're an outpost of the West fighting off these illiterate sand savages. And I've said it before on this show and on my show where it's like they're actually not that different from each other. They're really not Western at all. I mean, but a lot of people would agree with both of us on this, but Western civilization is Christian. Like what we would define as Western, we wouldn't say like the Vikings. That was a very like Western ideology. Like Westernism, basically came from the Catholic Church, like the Catholic Church trying to create a universal church, spreading the gospel. This created Western civilization. It is Christian. And what does that mean?
And
Forgiving
the explorers
your enemies.
were missionaries, right?
The
Trying to
explorers were
educate
missionaries.
the savages.
Right.
Yeah.
But that is not what they don't believe in forgiving thine enemies. They believe in destroying their enemies.
Yeah.
And so that's not Western at all. But we got some super chats here. I don't want to get too far behind. That being
All right.
like someone paid so that we would read this. Hold on, let me get the mouse working here. This mouse sucks. Come on, there we go. So Lord of the Ree, ironic. He says, the Palantir tainted Saruman and made his heart evil. Why would I trust it with my information and or data? Don't let your memes be dreams. This is what I was explaining to you before the show, that the name Palantir comes from Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And it was basically these, for those of you listening that don't know, they're like these crystal balls. They can show you your future. They can show you the present. But they've been corrupted by the villain in Lord of the Rings. And basically, like it's like a metaphor for the shameless seeking of knowledge of the future only corrupts. Which ironically, Peter Thiel, being a big Lord of the Rings nerd, named all of his stuff after stuff the bad guys used. I won't read too much into that. Lord of the Rings says tiny hats can get over it. If they do, they lose their perpetual victim status as well as their means of manipulating the populace. Completely agree. And that's like what you were saying, where the anti-Semitism, it is kind of a weapon in their arsenal. Like, and of course they would never say this publicly because it would kind of give them away. But let's be honest. you and I know that when those two diplomats got shot, and when this guy was started throwing Molotov cocktails out at a pro-Israel rally, you know, behind the scenes, probably Bill Ackman and definitely Netanyahu and probably a lot of others like them were like, yes, like this is exactly like, you know, they're like, oh, this is a tragedy. And I'm sure they're upset about it, but that's the point, is it's like vindication, you know, like this is what we need to show you, Goyim, that we are the perpetual victims.
Yeah, I mean, it dominated Fox News. Every anchor.
They're still talking about it. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if information is in fact power, whether it's Peter Thiel using the private information of people for political power, or whether it's the information used by the media for one political agenda or the other. Information is power. Power is politics. Politics is control.
Right.
And so people who are not concerned about the hereafter, people who do not believe in eternal life, who do not believe in, you know, following the Christian thinking, probably think there's really no advantage to not maximizing the benefit here on earth. You know,
right.
Because I've had Jewish people say that, you know, they've kind of laughed at the faith, the fact that you're hoping for eternal life in heaven. You can't prove that. There's no evidence of that. Why do I want to bank on something that can't be proven?
Right.
And so, yeah, the whole basis of Christianity is faith, something that, you know, I haven't seen the videotape of the resurrection, so
yeah.
I'm just trusting that is what's happening and believing the Christian teaching. But other people, whether they be Muslims, Arabs, or Jewish people, or Buddhist, or Hinduist, they kind of have a different take on how life on earth and death interact.
Right. And that's one of those things that, like, when we talk about religion, it's like, you know, I had a crisis of faith when I first went to college, and I began to pursue an understanding of Christianity and an understanding of it so that I could properly defend it. But as time went on, I just began to realize that, where it's like, you know what, like, basically the atheist arguments have been they're so basic and so diluted, they appeal to like 110 IQ people, you know, like, which Sam Hyde, I'm not sure if you know who that is, but he says that having a 110 IQ is probably the worst IQ you can have, because like you're better off being a retard than a 110 IQ, because you're smart enough to feel superior to the average man, but not smart enough to be right about anything.
That's right, and certainly gullible enough to believe everything you hear. And of course, if you have 120 or 30 IQ, right, you believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see.
Exactly. So Zeb is texting me. He sent me a couple screenshots. Apparently, Trump and Elon are beefing on Twitter right now. And Zeb, I don't have the thing pulled up here, so I can't pull it up for the audience. So I'm just going to read what it says. So apparently 9 minutes ago, Donald Trump says, Elon is wearing thin. I asked him to leave. I took away his EV mandate that forced everyone to buy electric cars that nobody else wanted. That he knew for months I was going to do, and he just went crazy. The easiest way to save money in our budget, billions and billions of dollars, is to terminate Elon's governmental subsidies and contracts. I was always surprised that Biden didn't do it. So fair point, actually. You know, like Elon essentially pays for SpaceX through government contracts, which I understand. But Elon says, time to drop the really big bomb. At real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day, DJT. Ooh.
Well, neither one of them are acting like leaders in that exchange.
Right.
They're acting like competitors who want to win and are in the gutter, hitting below the belt, not rising above the fray at all. So, and that's a good point. You know, we all have leadership and management potential, and we all act in different ways. You know, you might act like a leader in front of your child, and you might act like a manager with your your buddies. So I'm not saying that anyone is perfect, but that's not inspiring. That kind of conversation, that kind of bickering, does not inspire people to want to be like them.
Yeah, and and the thing is Donald Trump, like, and this is just my opinion. Like, it's not like some hot take, but this is just kind of my opinion from like an optics standard. Donald Trump is going to win this because Elon Musk is a great innovator. He's a great visionary, but like when Donald Trump says in his tweets that he said he wasn't going to mandate EVs and says that Elon Musk freaked out, I kind of believe that. Like Elon, he's had multiple kids with multiple women, and he has this childlike innocence to him. But I also think, excuse me, he has this, but with the childlike innocence, it has a childlike, belies a childlike mentality, which is, I don't get what I want. And, a man with, what is it, like $200 billion? A man with $200 billion having someone tell him, you can't have this, it's like telling a bird they can't fly anymore. You know what I mean? Like, like I totally believe that he freaked out. But the point is like between an argument between the two, Donald Trump's going to win, even at his age.
Well, yeah, no, and that's what makes Trump somewhat of a leader. I mean, he's won on the business level. He's been successful. He's been successful on the media level with a TV show. Now he's been successful on the political level. As impressive as Elon Musk is, he's still the silver medalist compared to the gold medalist Trump. Right. And so I'm with you on that. I just am disappointed that Donald Trump has stooped to that level. But
are you surprised?
No, because he's a Queens kid and he's a street fighter, and he went to the University of Penn, the Wharton School at Penn, but no, he's not an aristocrat, no. and that's what a lot of people, I guess.
I mean, that's
resent.
what we like about him, But
that's what
a
we
lot
like
of people
about
hate
him,
about him.
But that's what the Washington establishment hates.
Yeah.
That he's doesn't have all those superficial polishes and all that saccharine superficiality going to him. But it's funny. Before we came over here, I was watching a rerun of Gunsmoke. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And there was a situation on there that kind of I felt might be relevant to this discussion. Matt Dillon, for those of you who don't know, was the sheriff of Dodge City, Kansas, and he, in my mind, was very much a leader. Perry Mason was more of a manager, if you want to use old 50s black and white TV shows. But James Arness was bringing a prisoner back to jail, and he ran into a cavalry regiment, and they said, a couple of Indians have escaped from the reservation. We're hunting them down. So they went off looking for him, and then Matt Dillon fell off his horse and broke his leg, and the Indians that they were looking for came by, and he had known the Indians, and the Indians had known Marshal Dillon, and the Indians set his leg, helped him guard the prisoner, basically took care of him. And so when the cavalry came back, Marshal Dillon sent the cavalry in the wrong direction, because even though the Indians had broken a law by leaving the reservation, the bigger picture was they wanted to get back to their home and not be confined to a reservation the way, an internment camp or a concentration camp is. So Matt Dillon was able to rise above the law, rise above the management of, the cavalry's policies, and make an independent decision in this one case for this one Indian family to let them go and do what they wanted. And so that to me is a good example of leadership. Someone who has a complicated enough critical thinking ability, an IQ much over 110, and he can make an individual decision based on this one situation alone, because normally he represents the law.
Yeah.
Normally he works with the cavalry. But a blanket policy was inappropriate to this one case. And that summarizes to me the fact that leaders have that ability to treat each case individually, whereas most of us don't have that ability. So we want a blanket policy. We want to do transactions and transitions, not transformations.
Right. That's a that's a good point, because and that's something that Zeb and I talk about, like with the influx of all these different cultures and different peoples coming into America. A common sense of what is good is basically being diluted. And now, so what happens when the, like the founders, they could only be so explicit with their phrasing of things, like a well-regulated militia, blah, blah, blah. But now that can, because they never thought they would need to explain that, oh, as guns advance, well, maybe that'll change. You know what I mean? Like, it's because, and that's because everyone they knew was not really that much different than them. But we're living in an extremely diverse country now. And the point I'm getting at is that we're basically in lieu of the common good is changing. Now you have people, they rely on the written law, but the law is so mishmashy, and when you got these legalistic types, that's where they really thrive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the way I view it is, it kind of goes back to the demographic statement I made early on in the show.
Right.
The demographics were somewhat homogenous. When the people came over on the Mayflower, they were similar, but they represented the ideals of the American spirit. And I think if you'll notice, African Americans, Asian Americans, Arabian Americans, Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, Jews, people who embody the American spirit, I think, are very successful as being part of the American citizenry. It's not the demographics. It's not even male or female. It's not whether you're 70 or 17. The point is, you either believe in the values and the ideologies of America or you don't. And I live in a neighborhood where we have an African American, an Indian American, an Asian American, and they all are following the American dream. They all are sacrificing. They all want a better life for their kids. They are all very patriotic, and they are all very supportive of American citizenry. They're not dissidents. They're not trying to turn America into a different country. They're here because they want to be here, and they understand what it is to be American. So race, religion, color, gender, age, those are very superficial measures of a person's worth. Their spiritual orientation is much more complex. So if you have the American spirit, if you believe in the American dream, that's a little harder to recognize. You got to sit down and you got to talk to someone for a half hour. You can't just look at their headdress and make a generalization. And I think that's what has become so problematic with the influx of a diverse society. We can't tell right off the bat.
Well, that's the thing, is it's like, say what you will about like the cause of behavior, where it comes from. Is it genetic? Is it purely cultural? We can debate that all the live long day. But a fact, an obvious fact that neither of those worldviews can escape from is what you tend to see is, of course, you find African Americans, of course, you find Indian Americans and Asian Americans that are very patriotic, that are very like, they kind of shed away a lot of essential things from where they came from in favor of being an American. But this was much more common earlier on, when we had these strict sort of mandates about how many people we could let in. And basically what happens is, if you let one Chinese immigrant doctor, you say, this guy is just a killer in a good way, heart surgeon, and he wants to come to America from China. All right, you can come on over. But then he buys a house and he's surrounded by WASPs. He's surrounded by fully acclimated Americans. eventually that will trickle down to him. When you let in 100 Chinese people and they all buy houses in the same neighborhood and they don't know English as well, and everyone basically around them continues to speak Chinese, assimilation is either impossible or is extremely prolonged. I would argue even in the initial case, and you see this, like, and I grew up in a very diverse church. The church I grew up going to was mostly Asian. And you would see a huge difference between the parents and the children. But the point being, so my point being is like first generation immigrants are almost like to like become like it. I'll just say it's impossible for them to fully assimilate, you know, in the same way that their children could.
That's right.
And my point being is like, but what happens when the descendants of the original Americans, these sort of inheritors of that original culture, are outnumbered? Is it America anymore?
And that's a good question. The immigrant, the first generation, I think their job is to steer the kids towards Americanization. And it does take time for succeeding generations to become fully Americanized. But, you know, I can almost remember that people who became too Americanized were actually criticized. I remember it was a pejorative term. Well, African Americans would call other African Americans Oreo cookies if they acted too white, right? You're black on the outside, but you're white on the inside. So if you tried to get an education and go work in an American company, you were turning your back on your culture. I was called a cottage cheese cannoli because I broke out of the Italian neighborhood and went to work with the WASP in New York. My cousin still hasn't forgiven me. But then again, you know, there still was that assimilation. And now my kids have very little association with Italy. But again, you come to America for the land of opportunity. You come here for the benefit of becoming American. If you don't want to be American, well, go to Sweden. You know, go to Canada, go to Australia. I just don't understand. And if we've had a problem assimilating immigrants, I have to blame the people who are in charge of immigration policy. I mean, if we do in fact elect people to go to Washington, whether you know it's donors or voters, the point is they're hired to do a job, and an immigration policy, a secure border, I think, is part and parcel of the job. Job number one, keeping us safe, protecting us, whether it be physical harm, economic harm, social harm, psychological harm. I mean, in effect, we've let our legislators create a $40 trillion debt. We've let them have a porous border. I mean, we just have let them not represent our best interest, and that is what's so refreshing to me about Donald Trump. He's at least saying, let's make America first again.
I'm going to send you a video. There's a great guy on YouTube. He does these, he makes like one video every 4 months, and they're these like long form essays. And it's clear, like he's a young guy. I'd say he's either slightly older or slightly younger than me. He's clearly a young guy. And he does these videos, like he did one video where he was like, no, Thomas Jefferson did not sleep around with slaves. No, the Greeks and Italians weren't gay. Like you probably hear a lot of this now that the ancient Greek or Romans were like openly, like homosexuality was totally fine.
I've had enough pejoratives directed at my people.
I'm sure. I'm sure. But one of them he did was, and I had talked about this on my show at the time, and how I was not going to vote for Donald Trump.
Right.
And I explained why. And as you know, the Wake Up Carolina audience could not abide. You know, that like you're part of the problem, blah, blah, blah. And look, I get it. You know, every vote counts, sure. But the way I saw it was this. I was, by that time I had been completely moved to South Carolina. I'm a South Carolina citizen. My vote does not count. South Carolina is going to go for Donald Trump. And I just don't want to take the time to do it. But I do think that in light of that, I'm kind of bringing it, that's what I like about these, where we just kind of play, we kind of wing it, because it's all coming together. I think we've talked about like where the power of the voter lies, the problems with assimilation and whatnot. So a lot of people actually do understand the solutions to the problems we have. The problem with them is the execution. The only people that have the power to execute these solutions are the politicians. And who decides who the politicians are? Well, the voters. Well, not really. It's actually more the donors. So unless we plan on becoming multi-billionaires, which if I knew how, I would do it. But I just am not. The point being is like, so what can we do? And I think, because here's the thing, you have to say your vote is your voice, right? Well, what if it's, I'm voting for Donald Trump and I'm not crazy about him, but I really don't like Kamala, so I'm voting for Donald Trump. Well, what do they hear when you vote yes? They just hear a yes. They don't hear the complaints you do have, which is why I think and that's why I want to talk about it right now, is getting it into the minds of people that you don't have, you can vote for the Republican or the Democrat, but it's not actually a binary choice. There is a third option, which is refusing to vote. And you say, no vote is a vote for the opposition. That's not true at all. If you were to organize enough people to say, I'm not voting for J.D. Vance or Donald Trump, and here's why. Because you promise a wall and you never deliver. Donald Trump did not say, build a wall this time around. He did not say that during the campaign this time around. And none of the conservatives were calling him out on this. What if we had, is the point. Because basically once he's in, you can't do anything. But if you create a loud enough bang, if you create a lot of noise where it's like, hey, douchebag, whoever it is, this is what we expect. And your term is up in 4 years. If we don't get this, if I'm told one more time to and we'll use the border wall as an example. If you got enough people to basically say to not just him, but the Republican senators, Republican congressmen, you're going to give us a border wall or we're going to primary you. And primary, obviously we can't donate to the opposition or whatnot, but it's like, look, yeah, we're not going to vote. We're not going to vote for the Democrat, but we're not going to vote for you unless you give us what we want. We've been asking for border security for 60 years, and you never, ever, ever, ever move the meter. We better start seeing some progress, some real progress, not, I tried and it didn't work out. If you try and it doesn't work out, then you're out. That's the kind of mentality that I want to start seeing in the voter.
Well, I talk about that because people who are managers, they know how to exploit human nature.
Right.
They know people are basically not going to get off their butt and go work to get the changes made.
Right.
I often say that leaders advocate for human nature, managers exploit human nature. And the reason that there's divine nature and human nature kind of parallels that difference. You ask me what we can do. What I did is I wrote a book. Okay, I was listening to conservative radio and people said, we got to put an end to this Biden situation. So I did my part. I wrote a book, cost me quite a bit of money. Never hopeful to recoup that money. But I wrote a book to do my little part. I'm still waiting for the checks to clear for this podcast.
Me too.
But I could be watching, more television, but we're talking about this here. We're doing what we can to present a different point of view, a point of view which might connect with someone, one listener at a time. So, I'm doing what I can, knowing that I don't have the money or the power or the authority to do much. But it's kind of like that kid who threw the starfish back into the ocean. It meant a lot to that one starfish that got thrown back into the ocean, even though there were 99 that dried up on the beach. So, I'm not delusional about what I can do and what I can't do. I'm doing all I can, and hopefully it makes a small difference. And there's millions more like us who will continue to do their small part, and it'll aggregate.
Well, and that's my thing is it's because I wish people would apply the go out and vote mentality to other things, because I honestly feel like when you like, this is something that I was not interested in politics at all before Donald Trump came on the scene. But he, like you said, he's clearly a effective leader, and he does not inspire voters, he inspires followers. And when you get people like that, you realize like it was a popular, basically like nihilism was the dominant philosophy, especially after 9/11. Like when I was growing up in 2010, 11, it was all like this nihilistic, like nothing matters, like you can't change anything mentality. Donald Trump came on the scene and made me feel like change was possible. And honestly, like they accuse me of being a black pillar. I don't know if you know what that means, but it's like everything kind of sucks. I mean, honestly, it doesn't, because, I know Christ is in control. And I'm not worried because the future's in his hands. But the disciple, who was more godly than the disciples? And they were all martyred.
Right.
The future, that doesn't mean.
But Thomas wasn't on board. Judas turned.
Yeah.
Right? So
life
even there
messy.
were some
right
non-supporters, naysayers,
exactly,
detractors, however you want to describe it.
The point being is that life is messy, and you do have to work at it. And just kind of resting on your laurels, it's not good enough. Like just do little things, like hold the door open for people and work up from there. Become an activist. Go to your school's what are they, like parent teacher conferences or like school board meetings, school board meetings,
all that stuff.
Yeah. Get involved in that and try to make the world a better place. And can you do it? Can Joey Aniello do it? Can Josh Vandernoor do it? Can any individual in our live chat do it? No. But someone sees you doing it and they go, I want to be like that guy. And then another and another. And eventually, once we're all doing it, then it can be done.
Well, and one of my favorite expressions is doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of insanity.
Right.
Bringing it back to the anti-Semitism. I would, if I was Jewish, I would say, okay, anti-Semitism has been going on a long time in a lot of places. Do I have any responsibility in that? Is there something I'm doing that's causing people to be anti-Semitic? I think at some point, if you want to stop anti-Semitism, Jewish people have to examine maybe what they're portraying that rubs people the wrong way.
Right.
And I happen to think it's pretty simple. When you say that you are better than everyone else, people don't like that. You know, and not only that, but, science has proven you're not God's only people. There are people, civilizations before you. And, maybe you ought to change the chosen people spiel.
Yeah.
Like the Pope used to say that eating meat on Friday was a sin.
Yeah.
He changed that. Now it's not a sin. And again, at some point, it takes two to tango. If, why not take a little responsibility for anti-Semitism, meet with some anti-Semites, find out what the root cause of the problem is, and try to change some things.
Yeah. And a perfect example of that is it's a little bit old news now, but I assume you probably heard about this whole thing with Dave Portnoy. You know who Dave Portnoy is?
Of course, Barstool.
Yeah, Barstool Sports. And basically like a 21-year-old like Puerto Rican guy, or I don't know, he was, I don't know, something else. And he wrote on a sign at one of his restaurants, "F the Jews." And it was like like it wasn't like this. He burst in there and was like, "I'm gonna kill all the big nose people," like it was just like a goof, you know what I mean? And like the waitresses were laughing about it. It was, it's like with everything going on, it's kind of not warranted, but like it didn't just come out of nowhere, like they're not making themselves look good. And normal people are kind of goofing on that. You know what I mean? It's funny to be sort of controversial. And like Dave Portnoy, what he could have done is said, this happened, but it's not a big deal. This is a kid having fun.
Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me.
And here's the thing. If he came out and said that, people would... Honestly, even I would be like, okay, like, like that's a good for him, man. That's great. But that's not what he did. He freaked out. He tracked the guy down. He's like, I'm a tough guy. I'm gonna ruin this guy's fucking life. He's a piece of shit. Fuck you. Like this tough guy act. And first off, him and Michael Rappaport. Can we drop the tough guy act? Like, you guys look like nerds. But anyway,
I know Michael as well. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, man. Like the tough, I saw that guy, like his ranting and ravings. And I'm like, dude, bring the volume down and act like a person. You're not tough. You look like a ginger. Like you're kicking nobody's ass. But anyway. But basically, yeah, it's like,
well, and
like forgive and forget. It's like, and that's the point. If this young kid came in and started trashing the place and was like screaming like genuinely anti-Semitic things, okay, I mean, I kind of get it. It's like, hey, we'll call the cops on this guy and the cops are going to take care of him. A little joke, literally like a little joke. And he's trying to ruin. He's hunting this guy down, looking up his credit card information. Like, calm down, dude.
To kind of tie it back to what we talked about, Portnoy's response is very managerial. That's a very understandable managerial, competitive. I'm not going to lose this battle. You hit me with a rock. I'm hitting you with a mortar. Mm-hmm. It wasn't leadership,
right?
Pope Francis tried to promote leadership in terms of tolerance and acceptance and, love. I don't know that Jewish people necessarily get beyond that eye for an eye mentality.
No.
We're not going to lose here. I mean, I think I've mentioned in my book that fully half the Jewish population in America are worth $1 million or more. Half of the billionaires are Jewish. Mm-hmm. Those are demographic facts. What are they doing with that money? They're using it to increase power. And you only need an IQ of 105 to figure that out.
Right.
Anecdotally, you meet someone and they do that and you make the connection. And I got to tell you, I did not grow up in a prejudiced house. I remember asking Alan Shulman what nationality is. Shulman is a very Jewish name, but I didn't even know that. That's how naive I was at 22 years old.
Yeah.
But over time, you make associations and you kind of draw conclusions and make connections. And, everyone can't be wrong about anti-Semitism. There must be some reason that people have opposition to some of the things that Jewish people do. Why not be self-reflective? Why not say maybe a little change would, dissipate some of this anti-Semitism? I haven't seen any Jewish leader do that.
Yeah. It's like we just talked about and you just said, is the cause of anti-Semitism, is it just vacuum? Like does it just come out of thin air?
Is it unfounded?
Or does it come from us. And you see this problem in the black community too. It's like, oh, everyone hates us because we're black. It's like, well, first off, calm down. It's like not everybody hates you, but to criticize you based on like just behavior, that, let's be honest, your community has developed a reputation with stereotypes. They don't fall out of the sky. Reputation is reputation.
Yep.
And yeah, it's like, and I feel bad because we had a call-in show the other week, and we had this not African American, he's a black guy, but from the UK. And he called into our show, and he was a very conservative dude. And he was talking to us about like racial relations in the United States. And I go, look, it's a sad fact of life, but it is a fact of life. It's when you're black, white, Jewish, Asian, Hispanic, whatever you are, people that aren't like you will have a generalized perception. And you'll be lopped in with that automatically. That is natural.
I had to explain to people that I was not in the mafia.
Right.
I didn't know anyone in the mafia.
But the problem is I think the world would be a lot better place if people would accept that. This idea that like, don't, and even the word to judge people, like don't judge me based on my appearance. I mean, yeah, but let's be real. Nobody can help that. That's just part of who we are. And honestly, if people accepted that, it's like, look, I'm this Italian guy. I've got my hair slicked back. I wear a leather jacket, and I talk in a super thick accent.
Forget about it.
Forget about it. And then I go somewhere, and they're like, "Oh, are you in the mafia?" And I'm gonna be like, "Whoa, that's prejudice." Like, no, if.
Well, the thing is, though, I was dressed in a suit with no greasy hair.
Right.
And I was still asked if I was in the mafia.
Well, exactly. But that's my point, is it's like, and also, let's be honest, like people joke, I mean, I've never made that joke with you because you don't come across as super Italian to me. But if you did, I'd be like, forget about it.
I'm a cottage cheese cannoli. Yeah. I'm only Italian on the outside, not on the inside.
It's all in good fun. And we did a show once, and I asked the audience, I was like, are there any Dutch stereotypes? I mean, if there are, I'd be okay with it. The only ones I could find online is that we eat a lot of cheese, which is true, but that's not as like, I don't know, it's not as funny as like.
Well, there's the Dutch boy paints. And the kid who stuck his finger in the dike.
The kid who stuck his finger in the dike.
To stop the leak, right? That's the only one I remember.
So, you know what's funny? I actually did that once. I didn't.
No, it wasn't a lesbian that you stuck your finger in.
You bastard.
Oops. Sorry.
No, it wasn't. So I didn't stick my
finger.
It was the
wall. You wanted a wall. In Holland, they have walls to keep the water out, not the immigrants.
I didn't stick my finger in the dike to stop the water, but me and my family went to Disney World, and they had like a big gate, and there's just this big keyhole, and I stuck my finger in it, and my finger got stuck.
Oh gosh!
But so that did happen to me. That's funny.
Oh man!
I do love cheese.
Hey, tulips, right? You like is tulip your favorite flower?
Yeah. I don't really have a favorite flower, to be honest.
Well, that reminds me of a joke, since it's a podcast.
Yeah. What
is better than a rose on your piano?
What's that?
Tulips on your organ.
I like that one. That's
so there.
I was okay. I'll be honest. When you said tulips, I was trying to think of a joke, but
there it is.
But it wasn't coming to me.
Do we have a couple minutes?
Sure. Yeah.
One thing I want to talk to you about, because so far I know we were talking about things that exist.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism, racial this, mafia that. Mm-hmm. But let me give you an example of something I mentioned in my book that would be in the future.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We've talked about the Iran thing, but the whole Taiwan thing.
Okay.
It's like this could be a linchpin for something really bad between Chinese interests and American interests, okay? If I was a leader, okay, I would go to President Xi and I would say, hey, you know what the British did with Hong Kong? We gave a 10-year window to convert Hong Kong back to the Chinese. We gave all the British 10 years to either stay or leave, to move their interests, to make themselves whole. I would go to President Xi and say, let's give you Taiwan back in 10 years. But during those 10 years, any Taiwanese can immigrate to the United States. You can set up your business. You can bring anything you want to. You can stay. You can go to Korea. You can go to Japan. You go to Philippines. You go to Vietnam, everything else. Because I think the Chinese have a legitimate interest to want Formosa, is what they used to call Taiwan, back. But if we give them 10 years to do it, we give everyone a chance to get out, that to me seems like a solution that could avert World War III. The Chinese could be happy with that, and the Westerners could be happy with that. But why is no one thinking about that until the ships are in the sea or the airplanes are in the air? Now, to me, that is a reasonable decision for a country that's 8,000 miles away from Taiwan compared to a country that's 800 miles from Taiwan. But those are the kind of solutions that I expect out of leaders. Just like Trump saying, we're not going to bomb Iran, we're going to try to work this out. The management approach is, we have bigger bombs, so let's bomb the nuclear sites.
Yeah.
Then you have hatred of 1/3 of the world against America by association with Israel. That's not a good long-term solution.
No, of course
You're not
not.
going to bring hate. You're not going to stop the hate, no matter how many nuclear sites you bomb.
Yeah.
So what's the bigger long-term fair and equitable solution? Something other than what they're suggesting.
Yeah, that's one of those things where, like, there's two ways we can go about this conversation. There's the why don't our leaders think like that in like a conceptual sense, and why don't they think like that in the real sense? And I think they don't like, I don't know if I agree with every aspect of your hypothetical, because this is something we've talked about before on my Saturday show on Live 95.3. Not this specifically.
Well, when you're my age, you forget what things that you repeat.
No. Not about Taiwan, but we have talked about. I forget the example we used back then, because this was several months ago, but it was basically something along the lines of revolutionary thinking. It's like, here is a solution to a problem that no one's talking about. I think it had something to do with immigration, but I couldn't quite remember what it was. But yeah, basically it's like how to deal with China and Taiwan. Something like that. It's something no one's talking about. Something I hadn't even thought about.
Propose it and start discussing.
Exactly.
That's all.
Exactly. Now, I do think, but then there's the question: it's like, is it because no one in Washington thought about it, or is it because they have an interest in maintaining it? Because I do know that a lot of our computer chips are manufactured in Taiwan, and I know that we're kind of shifting our goal away from Taiwan towards South America for that manufacturing, which I understand. But the thing is a big. There's a lot of moving parts here, and I don't profess to understand them all. But I think, I definitely think that a lot of the solutions to our problems could be solved if we brought manufacturing back to the United States.
Well, and the Taiwanese manufacturing, it's a turnkey. Take them from Taiwan, move them to Utah.
I don't know if I agree with that aspect of it. But
wouldn't that automatically put all their knowledge and experience over here?
I don't think it's
if they wanted to come.
If they wanted to come, but here's the thing. I think if the threat of being reassimilated by China, they would almost exclusively come here, and then we have a big problem. We have a bunch of resentful Taiwanese people occupying a big space in Utah. I think when I say bring manufacturing back to the United States, I don't mean move the factory and all the workers from Mexico, India, China, or Taiwan here. I mean get the Americans working in these factories. Yeah, and if we have to figure it out, we have to figure it out, and it's going to take a while. But again, a big problem in Washington is they're manipulated by lobbyists. And lobbyists, where do they get their money from? They get their money from, you know, all sorts of
Investing
things.
in Taiwan.
And yeah, and manufacturing widgets, manufacturing things is cheaper in most places other than the United States.
Yeah.
That's why, like, the NAFTA agreement was detrimental, and we got to work to undo that. But
You know, I think we can summarize the problems that we've touched upon today.
yeah.
I think all the people in Washington have IQs of 110. Just
Or
enough,
worse.
just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to
Yeah.
solve anything permanently.
enough to feel good, enough to feel superior, but not actually be. Chris B says, I worked for, let me pull this up. Hold on. This mouse is super laggy, guys. Bear with me here. And it's frozen again. Come on. Boom. I worked for an auto parts supplier, and we went to Mexico and set up a clone plant. Their quality was so bad, everything got recalled. That's a perfect thing too. Is it's not even as good quality. I mean, Detroit used to be called the Paris of the West, and I mean now it's a you know what hole, and you know, like, industry leaving is part of that. I grew up in Charlotte, not far from Boone and Hickory, and Hickory was a huge furniture, you know, Hickory furniture.
Sure.
All of those places are almost dried up. They're almost completely gone because now they just manufacture furniture in Taiwan or wherever.
Well,
you know?
I moved something today with the
Mexico.
Vietnam sticker on it, made in Vietnam, yeah.
Yeah, we got it's like, yeah, we buy all our crap from China. Let's make our crap here. But anyway, I think it was a good show today. I had a really good time, Joe.
Yeah, I'm glad to have spent the time with you, and hopefully we, you know, kind of prodded and provoked a little thought, right? That's our job.
I think so.
That's why we get the big bucks.
the big $10 from Lord of the Ree. Thank you, Lord of the Ree. And the rest of you, start chipping in, or I'm going to find you and kill you. I'm kidding. But that was a very managerial thing to say.
Exactly.
Instead of a leader.
Competition, not collaboration.
Exactly. But again, Joe, hold on. So Trump will pardon Diddy, and the Trump fans will still defend him. Yeah, probably. I mean, and this was something. Before we go, this was something I said. Oh, actually, I think I did say it Saturday instead of on here. So you may have heard this before. So I'll repeat it for them. That we always talk about on the right Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
What we don't talk about is Trump derangement syndrome or Trump obsession syndrome, like that the people on our side will follow him no matter what. And I think that's something we got to start talking about.
Well, I think people are comfortable in either extreme. They're more comfortable in the extremes than in the middle.
I agree. Dang, this mouse is... Sometimes when Zeb runs most of the shows, and I'm like, dude, hurry up with the... And now I feel his pain. So Chris B says, good show. The channel is probably shadow banned. I'm going to look into that because I think you're actually right. Do you know what that means?
No, I do. No.
Shadow banned means the channel is not kicked off of YouTube. Like, you can still find it. But if you were to search us by name, we would not show up as a result. It's one of those, like, it can only be found by people who already know where it is.
Is it that controversial?
It might be.
Wow.
Zeb says, I'm listening, little busy, LOL. Yeah, Zeb, he teased us with a good time. He said he was going to be here today, but he's not. But hopefully he can join us tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to be on with Rodney Berry. Ideally, he has not confirmed yet. But regardless, if he's not here, I might do another solo show. But we'll see. Baby Uno says, yeah, definitely shadow banned. I wouldn't be surprised at all. But appreciate you guys tuning in. Joe, I appreciate you coming on and joining me.
Thanks for letting me be part of it, guys.
Yeah, and we will catch you guys tomorrow. Adios.